They stole her name, her place, and the life that should have been hers. But under the cold light of the moon, she returns not as a broken girl, but as the one woman every enemy failed to bury. In a palace woven with lies, betrayal, and dangerous desire, every smile hides a blade, and every step brings her closer to the truth. They thought she would disappear into silence. Instead, she became the storm that would make an empire kneel. Moonfall on Cold Brocade. Chapter 1. Lanterns in the Cold Wind. On the 15th night of the first lunar month, the residence of Marquis Annuan blazed with red lanterns. Brocade runners covered the corridors. Laughter drifted from the front court all the way to the rear garden, and every noble household in the capital knew why. The Marquis's residence was hosting a lantern banquet to welcome the new spring and, just as importantly, to display its celebrated legitimate daughter, Ta Mintu, whose gentleness and polish had become part of the city's gossip. Ladies from powerful families had come, young women from noble houses had come, even a senior steward from the Princess Royal's residence was in attendance. The whole mansion glittered as if it belonged to one long breath of light. Only one person in that grand residence seemed to stand outside it. Ta Van Chow stood in the west side courtyard before a bronze mirror gone clouded with age. She adjusted the old white jade hairpin in her hair and looked once at the ash-blue dress she wore. The fabric was decent, but the cut had fallen out of fashion 2 years ago. Outside the window, a thin layer of snow still clung to the plum branches. The wind slipped in through the frame and made the candle on her table flicker as if it might go out at any moment. Liu Mama entered softly with a thin cloak in her hands. "Second miss," she said in a low voice, "Madam has summoned you to the front hall. There are many guests tonight. She says you must not make the Marquis's residence lose face." Van Chow gave a faint, cool smile. "In this residence, face belongs to my legal mother and my elder sister. I am only remembered when they need a shadow standing behind them." Liu Mama laid the cloak over her shoulders. Her voice was tight with worry. "You have endured for so many years, but tonight I feel uneasy. Madam's eyes this morning were not the same as usual." Van Chow looked at herself in the mirror. Her features were delicate, her nose fine and straight. Her eyes were not especially sharp, yet they were unnervingly still, like water in an old well too deep to see the bottom. That calmness made people mistake her for weakness. Only Liu Mama knew that the feverish child, who had cried herself senseless after her birth mother, Lady Liu, died under the charge of stealing military documents, had long since disappeared. "Uneasy or not, I have to go," Van Chow said. "If I do not, they will have one more excuse to say the west courtyard does not know proper conduct." To reach the front court from the west court, she had to pass through a long gallery hung with glass carp lanterns. Candlelight spilled over the green stone floor in shivering bands. Peepaw music, congratulatory voices, and the laughter of maids braided together into the prosperous atmosphere Marquis Annuan always tried to maintain before outsiders. The moment Van Chow stepped into the main hall, she saw Ta Mintu. Mintu sat beside Lady Hor, dressed in pink silk, embroidered with spring birds perched on flowering branches. An 8-winged golden phoenix ornament gleamed in her hair. Even the smallest turn of her wrist felt practiced. The instant she noticed Van Chow, a flawless, tender smile appeared on her lips.
"You finally came, little sister." Mintu rose and descended the steps herself, taking Van Chow's hand as if they were truly close. "I was worried you might lose track of time in that quiet courtyard of yours. Come, let me introduce you to the ladies." That single sentence was enough for a few nearby noblewomen to exchange glances. Forget the time. In the side courtyard, the meaning was plain enough. The second daughter was so neglected no one had expected her to appear at all. "Thank you for remembering me, elder sister," Van Chow said, lowering her eyes. From the seat of honor, Lady Huo smiled. She was past 40, but carefully kept, with a bright face and eyes cold as needles. "All daughters of the Ta family should greet guests together tonight. Van Chow, do not wear such a mournful face. Others may think our household treats you harshly." At the phrase, "others may think," light laughter rippled across the hall. Van Chow bowed. Mother is right. What Lady Huo hated most was exactly this composure. Van Chow did not cry, did not protest, did not look openly wronged. She was soft as water. Striking her made no sound. Scolding her seemed to cause no pain. That only made her more irritating. The banquet soon began in earnest. Fruit wine had just been poured, and the flower lanterns had just been lit, when Steward's son from the Princess Royal's residence was invited to inspect the tribute gift the Marquis household had prepared for the Princess Royal's birthday next month. It was said to be a set of 12 brocade lanterns embroidered with scenes of spring over the river, based on Mintu's own designs and completed after half a month of work. Lady Huo smiled with measured humility. "My daughter knows only a little embroidery. I hope Steward's son will not laugh at her poor skill." Steward's son, a woman in her 30s with unusually sharp eyes, glanced once into the brocade-lined box, and her expression changed immediately. The first lantern had a fine tear along its body. Worse still, the thread hidden inside one of the folds was not the tribute-grade silk from the Bureau of Adornments at all, but the common sort sold in the Eastern market. Steward's son closed the box. Her voice remained courteous, but the temperature in it dropped at once. "Madam says this is a tribute gift for the Princess Royal's residence?" The laughter in the hall vanished. Lady Huo's face tightened for a heartbeat before she turned to Mintu. Mintu hurried forward, her hands trembling very prettily, as though she herself had no idea what had happened. "How could this be? I checked everything myself during the day." A maid threw herself to her knees. This servant only carried the lantern box to the west courtyard for the second miss to look over before bringing it back." The entire hall turned toward Van Chao. In that moment, she understood why Lady Huo's gaze had felt so strange that morning. For several months now, the Princess Royal's household had been considering a small selection of well-bred, skillful young women to assist with ceremonial arrangements and banquets. Mintu clearly viewed that opportunity as a stepping stone towards the favor of greater figures in the palace. If the tribute goods were found damaged tonight, a scapegoat was needed at once, and Van Chao, her courtyard, her birth, her reputation as the daughter of a disgraced concubine, was the handiest sacrifice in the room.
Lady Huo slammed her teacup against the table. "Van Chao, what did I entrust to you? Only to look over the items for your sister, and even that you failed to do properly?" Mintu quickly caught Lady Huo's sleeve, her eyes reddening. "Mother, please don't be angry. Perhaps little sister did not mean it. She has had so little chance to handle such things since childhood." It sounded like a defense, but every word pushed Van Chao deeper into the role of the incompetent, suspicious younger sister. The guests had already begun whispering. One lady on the left leaned to another and spoke softly, though not softly enough. "A concubine-born daughter is still a concubine-born daughter. Years in a side courtyard cannot change that." At the back of the row of servants, Liu Mama's hands tightened until her knuckles turned white. Van Chao did not rush to deny anything. She stepped to the box, bent to inspect the torn lantern, then examined the thread hidden inside. Only after that did she turn and kneel in the center of the hall. At the sight of her kneeling, Lady Huo relaxed by half. If Van Chao admitted fault in front of all these guests, the Marquis's household could still save face. A second daughter being scolded, punished, and forgotten again, such a price was cheap. But Van Chao raised her head and said in a voice clearer than anyone expected, "I ask forgiveness only for one thing, for noticing too late that someone intended to disgrace the Marquis's household." The hall fell still. Lady Huo's voice sharpened. "What do you mean by that?" Van Chao answered calmly. "The outer surface of the lantern was torn, yet the cheap market thread lies hidden in the inner fold. If this were mere carelessness after the piece was completed, the tear might be accidental, but the thread inside could not have changed on its own. Someone deliberately opened the lantern, replaced the thread, and then scratched the surface so that anyone looking only at the damage would assume the fault lay with the last person asked to inspect it." Steward's son narrowed her eyes. "Go on." "This afternoon, the brocade box was indeed carried to the west courtyard, but the maid set it down in the front room and left. I never touched it. If you wish to verify that, you may ask the 2 old women stationed at the courtyard gate. And more than that," she lifted the lantern and pointed to a tiny corner of the bamboo frame where a sharp-smelling residue clung beneath the gold paint. "This is pine resin mixed with cassia oil, used to seal a frame after it has been opened. There is none in my courtyard. There is, however, some in the needlework storeroom on the eastern side of the residence." Mintu's eyelashes trembled. For the first time that night, Van Chao looked straight at her elder sister. "Elder sister said you checked everything during the day. If everything was complete, then who was the last person to open the box with their own hands?" Mintu's face went pale. I only looked." "Looked or touched?" Van Chao asked, her voice low and cool enough to raise a chill in the room. Lady Huo shouted, "Silence! How dare you question your elder sister before honored guests?" Van Chow did not retreat. "Mother, this concerns the reputation of the Marquis's household and a tribute meant for the Princess Royal. If it is not clarified, outsiders may think our household intended to deceive her residents with counterfeit work." That one sentence deepened Steward Sun's gaze at once. She set down her cup and said slowly, "Madam, this matter is not small. If someone tampered with tribute goods, I think it should be investigated here and now. I have no wish to return to the Princess Royal, where the stories right and wrong cannot be told apart."
Lady Huo gripped the armrest so tightly her fingers whitened. In front of so many witnesses, she could not refuse. The maids and matrons connected to the matter were all called forward. The 2 gatekeepers from the west courtyard confirmed that the box had only been placed in the front room and that the second miss had never touched it. A maid from the needlework storeroom, shaking badly, admitted that someone had taken pine resin and cassia oil that afternoon under orders from the head maid attached to the eldest miss. That head maid then knelt and burst into tears, claiming she had only followed instructions and believed the eldest miss wanted to repair a lantern frame. All eyes in the hall turned to Mintu. She collapsed to her knees and wept beautifully. I only thought one lantern did not look quite perfect. I wanted to fix it in secret so everything would be flawless. I never imagined I would make it worse. I was afraid Mother would scold me and afraid the guests would laugh, so I let the maid say the box had gone past the west courtyard first. I never meant to harm little sister." She truly was the Marquis's household's legitimate daughter. In a few breaths, she turned a calculated act of framing into anxious perfectionism gone wrong. Even managed to hand half the blame to a maid. But tonight, Van Chow had no intention of letting the matter drift away as lightly as it always had. She lowered her head and spoke more softly still. "If elder sister never meant to harm me, then why was there a note wrapping the resin in the storeroom with Ying Qiu's handwriting on it and the words, 'Send it past the west courtyard first,' written clearly across it?" Ying Qiu froze. Lady Huo's expression changed sharply. Everyone in the hall understood at once that those words could no longer be called an accident. Steward Sun's tone turned colder. "That is enough. Marquis Anyuan's household wishes to present tribute goods and yet allows internal blame games of this sort to unfold over them? I will report this exactly as it happened. As for the lantern set, your household need not offer it any more." She rose. The other ladies followed suit, offering their farewells. Some of them cast Mintu glances entirely unlike the admiring ones they had worn that evening. Half the warmth in the hall vanished in moments. When almost all the guests had gone, Lady Huo struck Ying Qiu hard across the face and hissed, "Useless thing." Then she turned toward Van Chow, fury swallowed only because she had to swallow it. "Well done. In one night you have learned to overturn another's words. Years without discipline, and now stubbornness is what you bring back." The side of Van Chow's face remained calm. "I only proved that I am clean." Lady Huo laughed coldly. "Clean? Do you think winning once tonight means you can finally hold your head high in this house?" Van Chow looked at her, then at Mintu, who was wiping away tears even as her gaze hardened into something poisonous. Suddenly, Van Chow understood a truth she should have learned years ago. Her silence had never inspired caution. It had only convinced these people that she would forever remain meat on their chopping block. She bowed with perfect courtesy. "I would not dare raise my head before anyone. I am only saying that from now on, anyone who wants to force it down again will have to work harder than before." Lady Huo choked on her own anger. That night, when Van Chow returned to the west courtyard, the moon was half hidden behind cloud. Liu Mama heated water, pressing a cloth over Van Chow's hands while tears spilled down her own face. "Miss, at last you stopped enduring in silence." Van Chow sat by the window and watched drops of melted snow fall from the eaves. She was silent for a long time before she said, "Mama, when my mother died, they said she had stolen military papers. I was too young to know truth from lies, but tonight I understand something. The most frightening thing in this household is not their strength, it is that they are used to my not resisting." Liu Mama gripped her hand. "Miss." Van Chow closed her eyes and remembered Steward Sun's expression when the Princess Royal's household had been mentioned. That chance, once missed, would not be allowed to slip away again.
"Tomorrow," she said quietly, "I want the expense records for the needlework storeroom over the last 3 months and the list of everyone who entered and left." Liu Mama startled. "What are you planning to do?" Van Chao opened her eyes. At last there was a small flame in their stillness, small but unmistakable. "They like to use brocade, lanterns, needles, and thread to stage their games in the dark. Then I will begin there. Stitch by stitch, I will mend the debt left from years ago." The night wind tilted the candle. Her shadow stretched long and fine across the wall. It no longer looked like the shadow of a forgotten daughter in a side courtyard. It looked like a needle drawn from a sheath of silk, thin, cold, and sharp enough to cut through the splendid outer skin Marquis Annyan's household had used for years to hide the rot within.
Chapter 2. The List Hidden in the Thread Box. 3 days after the lantern banquet, Marquis Annyan's household looked peaceful from the outside, but gossip in the capital had already shifted. People spoke less of Ta Mintu's refinement and more of how the Marquis's residence's legitimate daughter, afraid of blame, had tried to throw fault onto her concubine-born sister. Once a rumor drifted beyond Vermilion Gates, no noble house could truly seal it back in. Mintu shut herself away under the excuse of quiet recovery. To preserve appearances, Lady Huo sent tonics to the West Courtyard every day and performed the role of loving mother whenever the Marquis was present. Marquis Ta remained busy with military affairs and rarely cared what passed in the inner residence. Seeing only apparent harmony, he let it be. Only Van Chao understood that the calmer the surface grew, the more something moved beneath it. It took Liu Mama 2 days to obtain the entry list for the needlework storeroom. She spread the pages across the table and pointed to a faded line. "Miss, look, on the day of the lantern incident, besides Yingchu, there was another person who entered to fetch tribute thread in the late afternoon." "Whose servant?" Van Chao asked. Liu Mama lowered her voice. "Not from the eldest Mrs. Rooms, a rough maid from the old matriarch's courtyard. Her name is Chunya." Van Chao tapped one finger lightly against the table. A maid from the old matriarch's quarters slipping into the storeroom precisely when Mintu needed her framing scheme arranged meant the matter was not as simple as a vain elder sister acting rashly. Someone behind the old matriarch had lent silent help. And in this household, the old madam had withdrawn from internal affairs for years under the excuse of ill health. If she had moved now, it was either to protect Mintu or because something larger stood behind her. That afternoon, a white silver invitation card was delivered to the West Courtyard. It was from the Princess Royal's residence. The instant Liu Mama saw it, her face changed. Van Chao opened it. Only 2 neat lines were written inside. 3 days from now, at the hour of C, present yourself at the Princess Royal's for the selection of probationary female officials for the Bureau of Adornments and the Bureau of Rights. Bring a prepared work. Liu Mama's hands trembled. "Miss, how can this invitation have come to you?" Van Chao ran a finger over the edge of the card. "Most likely, Steward Soon does not appreciate being used as a prop in the Marquis's household's tricks. I said a few correct things that night, and she remembered me." "But Madam will never allow you to go." "Then the first thing I must do," Van Chao said, slipping the card into her sleeve, "is not ask permission. It is to prepare something they will not be able to stop, even if they hate it." That night, she entered the old storeroom her mother had once used in the West Courtyard and searched until dawn. The room had almost been forgotten, filled with the faint cold fragrance of aged wood and silk that had long been stored with incense. In a double-bottomed chest, she found the peachwood frame her mother had used to stretch layered silk into miniature screens. There were also design sketches of clouds and water, drawn in her mother's own hand. When Liu Mama saw them, her eyes reddened. Back then, Lady Liu's finest skill was layered silk that changed beneath the light. By day, the piece looked like a landscape. By night, with a candle behind it, a moon and a boat appeared. "I remember," Van Chao said. Before her death, her mother had created ceremonial decorations for many noble households. If the sudden accusation of stolen military papers had not fallen on her, she might have entered the Bureau of Adornments long ago. For the next 2 days, Van Chao barely left the West Courtyard. She used white, deep blue, and silver-gray silk in 3 layers, folding and joining them with painstaking fine work to create a scene called Moon Over the River. By day, it showed only water and reeds under dim sky. By lamplight, a small boat emerged beneath a thin moon.
It was not brilliant or showy, but quiet and alive. On the morning of the third day, Lady Huo called her to the main hall. This time, the old matriarch was present beside Lady Huo and Min Tu. Dressed in dark robes, fingers moving over a string of prayer beads, the old woman looked detached from worldly matters, but the cloudy depth of her gaze warned otherwise. "Steward's son sent you an invitation?" Lady Huo asked, her tone oddly smooth. "Yes." "And you intend to go?" "Yes." Min Tu gave a honeyed laugh. "Little sister, the Princess Royal's household is no trivial place. The girls who appear there are all properly trained young ladies, polished in ritual and conduct. You have lived in the West Courtyard all year round. Even if your hands are somewhat nimble, I fear such a place may not suit you." Without looking at her, Van Chao said, "Whether it suits me or not can only be known after I go." Lady Huo tapped one fingernail against the tabletop. "I am not opposing you, but you know as well as I that the Marquis household cannot allow two daughters to display themselves over the same position. Min Tu has prepared for this some time. If you go too, others will think the Tao inner residence is not at peace." At last the old matriarch spoke, her voice dry and rough. "Second girl, you should know how to advance and how to retreat. A female official in the Princess Royal's household may sound fine, but in the end she still serves. A girl like you should keep to the rear court. If you marry into a decent family one day, that will already be fortune enough." Van Chao bowed slowly. "Grandmother teaches truly, but I am only a secondary daughter. My name carries little brightness, and the dowry attached to me is thinner still. If I do not carve out a path for myself, I fear even a decent household will never become my turn." Her answer struck the exact shame the family wanted hidden. The Marquis household's second daughter, tainted by her mother's accuser, had long found her marriage prospects stalled. The old matriarch was silent for several beats before she said, "Go if you insist, but if you lose the Marquis resident's face, do not blame the family law." As they left the hall, Liu Mama let out a breath, while Van Chao understood perfectly well that permission had not been given out of tolerance. They wanted her to fail before outsiders so they could force her into obedience once and for all. But this time, she had no intention of returning empty-handed. The Princess Royal's residence stood in the southeast of the capital beside Kuajiang Lake. On the day of the selection, carriages filled an entire stretch of road. Young women descended like petals in every color, carrying brocade boxes, embroidery screens, folded fans, zithers, incense burners, each bearing whatever she believed might buy her a step closer to power. "Not by eye," Van Chao said. "By hand. Standard rolls are almost the same. This one is lighter." The sun was already sinking westward by the time the selection ended. The daughters of noble houses departed one by one. Min Tu entered her carriage first and lowered the curtain without giving Van Chao a single look. As Van Chao approached the side gate, Steward's son had her called back. In the small study behind the corridor, beside Steward's son, a young man stood by the window studying a pot of narcissus. He wore an ink-colored robe with a plain jade belt. His features were refined but cold, his nose straight, his lowered lashes hiding half his thoughts. When he turned, his eyes were black and deep as lake water at night. Steward's son bowed immediately. "Your Highness, Prince Ning." Van Chao paused for half a beat before lowering herself in greeting. "Bui Kan Heng, Prince Ning." The capital liked to say he was often ill, uninterested in open rivalry, distant from the Eastern Palace, and no great friend-maker. Yet one glance was enough for Van Chao to know that the rumor describing him as harmless and idle could only ever be half true. Kan Heng looked at the silk screen in her hands. "That is what you brought?" "Yes, Your Highness. It has more life than most of the things outside, less fullness, more spirit." He said it as casually as if discussing the weather, but it was enough to make the room hold its breath. Steward's son cleared her throat and handed Van Chao a small jade token. 3 days from now, report to the Princess Royal's residence as a probationary assistant in the Bureau of Adornments. 1 month of assessment. Pass and you stay. Van Chao's fingers tightened slightly. She had succeeded. "Thank you, Steward." Steward's son watched her and added, "There is one more matter. I had your note about the missing 5-colored thread verified. You were correct. How did you see it?" "The knot at the end had been retied," Van Chao said. "Whoever took the thread rewound it, but the knotting habit wasn't the storeroom workers." This time, Prince Ning spoke. If you can tell what is missing from a spool by touch, could you also see what is missing from numbers, if given the right ledgers? Van Chow raised her eyes. If I am allowed to study them carefully, I can try. A nearly invisible smile touched his mouth. Interesting. By the time she left the Princess Royal's residence, her heart was still faintly unsettled. She knew she had taken an important step beyond the gates of Marquis An Yuan's house. But what remained most in her mind was not her success, it was Prince Ning's final question. He had shown little interest in whether a young woman was graceful, beautiful, or finely trained. He cared about whether she could read absence, whether she could see what had been removed from objects and from accounts. Which meant that in his eyes, technical artistry was only the surface. What he valued was the ability to detect what others had tried to hide. A carriage from the Marquis residence waited for her at the end of the lane. When she climbed inside, she saw Min Tu already seated there, the curtains drawn. The carriage was tight with the familiar scent of plum blossom perfume. Min Tu did not look at her. She only gave a quiet laugh. Little sister is quite capable. One lantern banquet was not enough, and now you have shoved your way into the Princess Royal's household, too.
Van Chow placed her wooden box beside her knees. Weren't you there as well, elder sister? If all you wanted was a place in the Bureau of Adornments, I would not mind. Min Tu turned at last, her smile thinning away. But do not imagine that putting half a foot outside this household means you can step beyond what you are. Someone like you, low-born, with a mother under disgrace, even if called a female official, would still only become a tool for others to use. Van Chow met her gaze. At least a useful tool is still used because it has value. Someone who makes stepping stones out of other people may one day trip over the very stone she placed. Min Tu clenched her handkerchief. That is how you speak to your elder sister? I am only reminding you of one thing, Van Chow said, her voice very soft, but each word clear. You still owe me an apology for the hall that night. The carriage jolted over a stone. Min Tu remained upright, then laughed aloud, to the point that the corners of her eyes curved. An apology? Van Chow, do you know what determines right and wrong in this household? Not truth. The one with power decides what truth will be. She leaned closer, plum fragrance coiling around every word. I have not lost yet. Van Chow did not retreat. I have only just begun. That night, when she returned to the west courtyard, someone stood waiting in the dark before her. It was neither a maid from the Marquis's residence, nor one of Lady Huo's people. It was a young eunuch in gray from the Princess Royal's household. With great care, he handed her a small oilcloth-wrapped parcel. Steward's son ordered this servant to deliver it privately to Miss Ta. She said it was found in the storage room for tribute thread after today's selection, and that perhaps Miss would wish to see it. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, old and yellowing at the edges. Van Chow opened it under the candlelight. One hurried line had been written on it. 40 rolls of tribute silk transferred to the military supply category. Receiving signature, Lady Liu. Her hand stopped. Lady Liu. Her mother's name. The small scrap cut like an old blade. It touched skin and reopened a wound she had once imagined scarred over. Her mother had been accused of stealing military documents, but this paper showed that at least she had been dragged into the transfer of tribute silk into military channels. If that was true, then the death years ago had not been caused by some random charge. It had been tied to a much larger flow of goods and ledgers. The moment Liu Mama saw Lady Liu's name, she nearly staggered into the table. Impossible! Back then, my lady was summoned away for one night and never returned. The next morning, the household announced she had committed a crime and forced poison on her. This old servant never saw a single paper, never a single explanation. Van Chow folded the note with great care, which is why they dared say whatever they pleased. Miss, this matter is dangerous. It should be dangerous, Van Chow said, placing the paper in the bottom of a wooden box, her gaze deepening. If this were only women in the inner residence harming each other over favor, they would not need to drag military silk into it. Once the matter touches that, Lady Huo and Min Tu cannot be the only ones standing behind it. The candle popped softly. Outside, snowmelt dripped into the courtyard in steady drops, like water counting the night watch. Van Chow sat for a long time, then opened a blank book and wrote 3 names, Lady Huo, Ta Min Tu, Lady Liu. Beneath them she wrote another line, the strokes harder, tribute silk, military supply, Princess Royal's residence, Prince Ning.
The door she had just pushed open no longer led to a probationary position in the Bureau of Adornments. It led to a web of lies that had buried her mother's body in mud for many years. To go farther, she would have to step into the center of a place where everyone wore a face that was not their own. But this time, she was no longer afraid of the dark. She had lived inside it for far too long already.
Chapter 3. No calm winds inside the palace city. On her first day reporting for duty at the Princess Royal's residence, Van Chow learned quickly that the title probationary female official sounded elegant only from a distance. In practice, it meant stepping into a machine that allowed no mistakes, not even half the width of a thread. The Bureau of Adornments managed all fabrics, ceremonial draperies, decorative installations, and dress items used within the residence. The Bureau of Rites coordinated layout, placement, timing, personnel, and ritual sequence. A length of silk hung unevenly, a color assigned to the wrong level, or a lantern placed too high or too low was enough to bring a rebuke before everyone in the yard. The women already serving there looked at Van Chow with every possible shade of judgment. Some were politely neutral, some were cold. A few lifted the corners of their mouths the moment they heard she was the second daughter of Marquis An Yuan's household. Even in a place like this, birth still formed the first verdict. The person directly over her was Madame Gui, a woman in her 50s, quick in body, sharp in tongue, and fair in a way that hurt. She threw a stack of old ledgers at Van Chow and said, 3 days. Learn the classification standards, the storeroom routes, the inventory categories. If you do not learn them, get out. Yes, madam. During those 3 days, Van Chow slept less than 10 hours in total. By day, she followed the senior women through storage checks, dispatch records, and procedural notes written in different colors of ink. By night, in the small room assigned to probationers in the West Wing, she copied the standards until her head ached. Yet the more she copied, the more she realized that the feeling she had at the selection had not been wrong. The numbers in the storeroom records had problems. Not large shortages appearing at once, small ones scattered so thinly that lazy eyes or inexperienced hands would dismiss them as ordinary variants. 2 spools of thread gone in one spring ceremony, 3 bolts of white silk missing after a hunting banquet, a silver-painted frame disappearing after a warehouse adjustment only to reappear later under another category. Each loss had been covered with a neat note explaining that the item had been transferred for a different use. If one looked only at a single month, nothing stood out. Lay 3 months, 6 months, a year together, and the pattern began to show. On the 4th night, Van Chow was comparing records under lamplight when Madame Gui stepped in unexpectedly. She looked at the pile of ledgers on the table and said in a cold tone, "You have nerve. You dared pull the master inventory books too?" Van Chow rose. "Please forgive me, I only wanted to understand the reconciliation method better." Madame Gui came closer and turned several pages quickly. Her gaze stopped on the marks Van Chow had made in charcoal beside suspicious entries. After a long moment she asked, "Who taught you to read records this way?" "No one. I only saw places that did not fit." "What did you see?" Van Chow was silent for 2 beats. Say too much now, and she might push herself into the hands of those who would shut her mouth. Pretend ignorance, and the chance to speak before someone who understood would be lost. In the end, she pointed to 2 columns. "This line says 3 rolls of tribute silk were transferred for temporary warehouse drapery, but temporary warehouses use coarse cloth, not tribute silk. Another line says 5 colored thread was used for ceremonial flags, yet the true number of flags would not consume that much. Someone is using reasonable categories to hide items being taken." For the first time, a small change passed over Madame Gui's stone-cold face. "Do you understand that touching this is dangerous?" "Yes." "And you still looked?" "Yes, because there is something I must find." Madame Gui did not ask what that thing was. She closed the ledger and spoke more quietly than before. "From now on, if you want to look, then look. But remember this, use your eyes and your hands. Your mouth opens only when the person who needs to hear it permits it." The next morning, Van Chow was summoned to the small study beside the waterside pavilion. Only Steward Sun and Prince Nin were there. Kang Han was arranging black and white stones on a game board with his own hands, as though he had either been playing in silence or had placed them there simply to wait for her. Steward Sun pointed to a low seat. "Sit." Van Chow sat according to protocol. Without looking at her, Kang Han asked, "Madame Gui says you have an eye for ledgers. Tell me this, if someone wanted to remove goods from the Bureau of Adornments without being noticed, how should it be done?" The question sounded like a test, but it also felt like a trap. Van Chow answered slowly, "Take a large quantity at once, and exposure comes sooner or later. Take a little at a time, divide it, and move it through categories that appear reasonable.
More importantly, the last point in the chain must contain someone who confirms the goods were fully used so the ledger closes cleanly. Kang Han placed down a black stone. And if that final point is not within the Bureau of Adornments, then there must be at least 2 signatures, one from the storeroom, one from the receiving side. She looked at the board. Find the handwriting or abbreviation that repeats too smoothly across unrelated categories, and you will know who keeps closing the record. Only then did he lift his eyes. Have you studied board games? No. It may be for the best. People who have never been taught the form of a board sometimes see it more clearly than those who only know where the pieces are supposed to go. Steward's son placed several copied ledgers before her, from the Princess Royal's household, from a supply depot attached to a military garrison outside the city, and from a merchant guild dealing in silk during the same periods. Take a look. For the full hour, the only sound in the room was paper turning. Gradually, the numbers began to speak to one another. Goods left the Princess Royal's household as temporary warehouse drapery. The military depot received them as moisture-proof padding for crates. Meanwhile, the Merchant Guild showed secret sales of superior silk into several noble households during the same periods. All of it connected into one path. Tribute goods were removed in name from ceremonial use, renamed as they passed through military channels, and the finest portion re-entered the market in shadow. Whoever profited earned silver and used military supply records as cover at the same time. What chilled Van Chow more was that some receiving marks in the older military ledgers used the same shorthand she had seen on the scrap carrying her mother's name. "Your Highness," she said, looking up, "has this been going on for many years?" "Yes." "And you have known?" "I knew there was a breach. Not enough hands had reached its core." Van Chow understood. To catch a chain that ran from noble mansions to military depots, it would not be enough to grab a few petty managers. One had to wait until the coordinators, beneficiaries, and protectors showed themselves. Strike too early, and the snake would only retreat deeper into its hole.
Steward's son spoke then. "I gave you the note with Lady Liu's name because I wanted to see your reaction. If you only knew how to cry, you were useless to me. If you were impulsive, you would die quickly. But you returned with brighter eyes than before. That means you understand what must be done." "I want to know how far my mother was involved," Van Chow said. Kan Hang gave a slight nod. "Then I will give you a path. Next month, Marquis An Yuan's household will be responsible for part of the mid-year ceremonial banquet in the palace. Ta Min too is trying to climb higher by approaching those around the Empress. If she is truly tied to this transfer route, she will show her face then." Van Chow's hand tightened within her sleeve. "Your Highness wants me as bait?" "No," he said in the same even tone. "I want you standing where you can see what others miss. Bait is passive. You," he paused, his eyes unexpectedly deep, "you seem to prefer hunting." For reasons she could not explain, Van Shaw's heart shifted by a beat. From then on, her title in the Princess Royal's residence did not change. She was still only a provisional official. But the work given her changed steadily. Madame Gui made her follow the most difficult storeroom inspections and untangle the ledgers most likely to make others' heads hurt. Steward's son occasionally called her to listen while the Bureau of Rights discussed the layout of altars, draperies, and banquet spaces. Prince Nin appeared rarely, yet every time he did, it felt as though he already knew what she had just begun to suspect. One drizzling afternoon, she was sent to deliver new silk samples to a lakeside hall for the Princess Royal's review. Walking along the greenstone corridor, she heard the thin, low sound of a 7-string zither from the pavilion ahead. When she drew near, she found Kan Hang sitting alone by the window beneath the eaves, rainwater hanging in long beads outside. When he noticed her, he stopped playing. "Do you know music?" "I know how to listen." "And what do you hear?" Van Chow placed the silk box on a low table. "I hear someone who was not playing to be praised." He laughed, this time clearly enough to see. "You never speak to flatter." "That is because I am not skilled at flattery." "No," he said, "it is because you say what you see. That is rare." He poured a cup of warm tea and set it down near her. Van Chow did not take it at once. "Your Highness is master. I am subordinate." "There is no one else here. You do not always have to hold yourself as though you were standing before a blade." She looked at the steam rising from the tea. It was not that she did not know how to soften. It was only that years in Marquis An Yuan's household had taught her that every time she loosened her grip, she paid for it. "Your Highness," she asked quietly, "why do you trust me? Only because I can read ledgers?" Kan Hang leaned back. The lake outside was gray as smoke.
because the one who has lived in mud can tell which footprints are fresh and which have sunk there for years, and because someone who wants to collect an old debt usually lasts longer than someone who serves only for salary." The words touched a place she kept hidden even from herself. A moment later he asked, "How deeply do you hate Ta Min-tu?" She said, "Enough that I will not spare her." And Lady Huo, "The same, and the people standing behind them." Van Chao lifted her gaze, clear and cold. "If they stepped on my mother's bones to climb higher, then I will drag them down." Rain struck harder beyond the eaves. Kan Heng looked at her for a long moment, then gave one small nod, as though from that point forward he had accepted her as someone who could stand on the same board. News traveled quickly back to Marquis Anyuan's household. The moment they learned Van Chao had passed the first assessment, Lady Huo summoned her home. This time the old matriarch was absent. Only Lady Huo and Min-tu sat in the main hall, with fresh mid-year brocades laid across the table. "I hear you are doing well at the Princess Royal's residence. That brings honor to the Ta family." Van Chao knew praise from that mouth had never come without poison. Sure enough, Lady Huo continued, "The mid-year palace banquet is approaching. Our household is responsible for part of the ritual drapery and silk banners for the outer ceremonial gate. Min-tu will represent the household in dealing with the Empress's people. Since you are working in the Bureau of Adornments, it will be convenient if you assist your sister." Min-tu set down her teacup. "Do not misunderstand, little sister. I know you are clever. That is why I want us to work together for the good of the household." Van Chao looked over the silk on the table. Among the beautiful colors were 3 rolls of white silver silk, the very sort most often marked in ledgers as transferred for other uses. If she agreed, she would be stepping directly onto the route her mother once had been dragged into. She lowered her head. "I am willing." Lady Huo seemed not to expect such quick agreement. Her eyes narrowed. "Good, then begin meeting with Min-tu tomorrow to discuss the details." On the ride back to the Princess Royal's residence, Van Chao spoke not a word. Liu Mama, sitting across from her, could not hide her unease. "Miss, they pulled you in themselves. It cannot be with good intentions." "I know," Van Chao said, watching the curtain sway. "But if I want to learn how my mother was drawn, I have to walk through the same doorway." Liu Mama bit her lip. "What if—" "There is no what if anymore," Van Chao said, slowly tightening her fingers around the scrap with Lady Liu's name hidden in her sleeve. "For years they kept shoving me into corners. This time, I move first." That night she sent a short note through the young eunuch at the Princess Royal's residence. "Marquis Anyuan's household has moved. Please prepare people to watch the brocade storerooms." Less than half a watch later, a reply came back. It contained only one character, written in very dark ink. "Understood." Staring at that single word, Van Chao felt an unexpected calm settle inside. The capital glowed at night like fallen stars, but beneath those red-tiled roofs, she knew a real wind had only just begun to rise, and once that wind entered the palace city, there would be no place left truly still. Chapter 4. Ashes in the Brocade Storehouse. That year's mid-year ceremonial banquet was planned on an unusually grand scale. The Empress intended to celebrate the Empress Dowager's birthday by drawing every major noble house into attendance, displaying prosperity while quietly testing who still stood firmly with the Eastern Palace. The outer ceremonial structures were assigned jointly to Marquis Anyuan's household and the Bureau of Adornments. The inner draperies belonged to the Princess Royal side. Merely hanging silk, assigning ceremonial colors, and positioning tribute items kept dozens of people running from dawn until nightfall. Then, all at once, Min-tu became astonishingly gentle with Van Chao. Every day she sent for her to come discuss plans, opened ledgers before her, asked for opinions on color choices, and even poured tea herself, calling her little sister in a tone warmer than before. To anyone watching from outside, it would have looked as though the lantern scandal had brought the two sisters closer together. Only Van Chao knew that when a snake coiled too still, it was usually preparing to strike. One afternoon, the two of them sat across from each other in Min-tu's study. Layout plans for the ceremonial gate and the silk dispatch list were spread across the long table. Min-tu took out a paper stamped with the Marquis's residence's seal and said mildly, "This is the item list I already confirmed with the Empress's people. See whether anything is missing." Van Chao's eyes moved quickly down the list. Most of it was ordinary. One entry stopped her cold. 6 lengths of first-grade white-silver silk, marked for use as the inner lining behind ceremonial standards at the rear hall. That kind of silk was not needed there at all, certainly not in a quantity of 6. "Why add this item?" she asked. Mentu rested her chin on one hand with a cool smile. "The Empress's people want the colors to glow under lamplight. You work in the Bureau of Adornments. Surely you understand that some things must be prepared even when they are not strictly necessary." Van Chao did not answer. She marked it silently in her mind. Several days later, the Bureau of Adornments received the order to dispatch exactly those 6 lengths of white-silver silk. But the receiving location was not the rear hall. It was the North Transfer Warehouse, temporarily used for goods moving in and out of the palace. Madame Gui looked at the dispatch slip and asked only one question. "Do you want to go and see it yourself?" "Yes." That night, under the excuse of checking quantity before transfer, Van Chao went with Madame Gui to the North Warehouse. It was large, with thick walls and 2 sides opening to empty corridors. Goods stood in rows from the entrance to the back, lit only by dull oil lamps brushing over wood, bundled cloth, and paint crates. While checking the 3rd row, Van Chao noticed fine white powder scattered across the floor. She touched it, smelled it, and frowned. "It is moisture powder mixed with sulfur," she murmured. "A brocade warehouse should not be using this." Madame Gui's face changed. "Sulfur?" she asked. "It's used for goods traveling long distances to prevent damp," Van Chao explained. "But in high concentration, it feeds flame." They exchanged a look. At that exact moment, the squeal of wooden wheels came from outside. More goods were being brought in. Madame Gui pulled Van Chao behind a stack of crates. Through the gap, they watched 3 eunuchs carrying cargo, followed by a man in a depot manager's robe from a military supply office. He presented a slip, the keeper glanced at it, and the cargo was taken to the west corner.
In the unstable light, Van Chao noticed at once that one of the supposed eunuchs was no eunuch at all. His steps were too heavy, his hands too rough, his eyes moved with the habit of someone who had once carried weapons. As he lowered a crate, he turned just enough for the inside of his right wrist to show. There was a hook-shaped scar there. Van Chao knew that scar. When she was 11, on the night her mother had been taken away, a guard had stood outside the west courtyard. He had borne the same mark on his right wrist. All the blood in her body seemed to turn cold. The men left. Madame Gui was about to step out when Van Chao caught her sleeve. "Wait!" She crouched to inspect the wheel tracks sunk into the ground. The grooves were deeper than they should have been. The crate was heavier than ordinary textiles, too heavy for silk. Understanding flashed between them. They circled through the shadows to the back row. A loose cloth half covered the load. Van Chao lifted it and saw fine silk rolls packed together with narrow copper cylinders sealed at the ends with wax. "What is that?" Madame Gui asked. "I do not know," Van Chao said, "but it is certainly not ceremonial fabric." At that instant, shouting erupted outside. "Fire! Fire in the North Warehouse!" The blaze rose far too fast, as though it had been waiting only for the smallest spark. Flames leapt from the east side, raced across hanging cloth and stacked crates, then caught the sulfur and burst upward in sheets of yellow light. Smoke rushed into their throats. "Move!" Madame Gui shouted. They ran toward the middle aisle, just as a burning beam crashed down in front of them. Outside came frantic voices, splashing water, useless noise. Heat pressed against their skin. Through the smoke, Van Chao glimpsed the false eunuch with the hook-shaped scar standing just beyond the warehouse door for one brief instant before disappearing. He had not come to move cargo. He had come to make sure the warehouse burned clean. The thought struck her in a flash. The 6 lengths of silver silk had only been bait. The true purpose was to destroy whatever was hidden in those copper tubes and to kill whoever might discover it in the process. Madame Gui tried to drag her toward the rear side exit, but the iron latch had been jammed from outside. Van Chao struck it several times to no use, her palms burning from the metal. For one brief, terrible moment, she thought she would die here. Then, the high lattice window overhead shattered. A figure dropped through smoke and fire, wearing an outer cloak soaked through with water. Kan Heng. "This way!" he shouted. Even in the middle of the blaze, his voice was steady enough to make the panic around it seem smaller. 2 imperial guards behind him used iron hooks to drag fallen wood aside. Kan Heng crossed the burning aisle in a rush, seized Van Chao's wrist, pulled her close, and wrapped half the wet cloak over her face. Another guard reached Madame Gui. Fire licked one of Kan Heng's sleeves black, but he never slowed. He drove her through the warehouse toward the side door the guards had just broken open. The cold air outside hit her face like knives. Compared to the heat within, it felt like life itself.
The moment they were out, her knees gave way. Van Chao dropped to the ground, coughing violently. Kan Heng crouched beside her with one hand bracing her shoulder and the other taking a cup of water from a guard. "Drink." She drank and coughed again, tears forced from her eyes from smoke. For the first time since her mother's death, she had stood that close to the edge between life and death. Around her were the shouts of those fighting the fire, the crash of wood collapsing, the orders of guards sealing off the scene. Through all of it, the hand steadying her remained firm.
"You knew it would burn?" she asked hoarsely. "Not for certain. I only knew there would be unusual movement tonight, so I had people watching. I did not expect them to be this impatient." Madame Gui was helped over, gray with smoke, but not badly hurt. Still coughing, she forced out, "The crates, the copper tubes." Kan Han nodded. "My people recovered 2 before the fire spread. The rest were lost." A guard stepped forward and murmured several words into his ear. Kan Han's expression darkened. He turned to Van Chao. The 2 tubes contained copied troop movement lists and receipt slips. The silk mixed in with them was only camouflage. The paper was what they truly needed destroyed. Van Chao tightened her fingers in her sleeve. "Who?" "Not enough yet," he said, "but one road is clear now. The North Warehouse is under people tied to the Empress. The transfer papers passed beneath Marquis An Yuan's name. If we investigate directly now, whoever stands behind it will cut off every tail." Van Chao looked down and noticed a small burn on her wrist where a coal had struck her. It glowed red, like a mark pressed there to remind her. Perhaps her mother was once dragged into a place like this as well, seen part of a secret, and never made it back out. "I saw someone," she said, once her breathing steadied. "A man with a hook-shaped scar on his right wrist. He was there the night my mother was taken." Kan Han's gaze changed at once. "You are certain?" "I am." He was silent. "If that is true, then the claim that your mother was silenced is now almost beyond doubt." The words "silenced" fell into her chest like a slab of winter stone. She had prepared herself for years, yet hearing it plainly still made the space beneath her ribs tighten. Her anger had long been a mist without shape. Now it had a face. Kan Han watched her for a long while. Then he said, "You can withdraw now." Van Chao lifted her head. "Does your Highness think I will?" "I think a clever person should know when her life matters more than an old grievance." She laughed once, thin and cold. "If my mother truly died because she touched these accounts, then if I step back today, I would be admitting she died as she deserved." The wind shifted his sleeve. He said nothing for a time. Then he slid a simple white jade bracelet from his own wrist and placed it in her palm. The stone was warm from his skin. "Keep it. From now on, if anything urgent happens, bring it to the south gate of Prince Ning's residence. My people will know what it means." Van Chao meant to refuse, but he had already risen. "I do not enjoy watching subordinates die for nothing," he said, as if that were the plainest explanation in the world. That night she was settled in a side chamber within Prince Ning's residence, while a physician treated the burn and the smoke in her lungs. The room was modest but clean, with gray-silver curtains and a pot of white plum blossoms set on the writing table. Only after the physician left did she open her hand fully and look down at the jade bracelet. Was it a token of trust, or a thread drawing her further inward? Most likely it was both. By morning, news of the warehouse fire had reached the whole palace city. Officially, an overturned lamp had caused it. No one had died. Some goods had been lost. The matter was made to sound nothing more than an unfortunate accident. But Van Chao knew better. What had burned was not only a warehouse, it was the patience of the people on the other side. They had begun to want witnesses dead. 3 days later, Lady Huo urgently called her back to the Marquis's residence. The air in the main hall felt strange the moment she entered. Min Tu sat there, pale-faced. On the table lay a charred copper tube, its wax edge melted away. Madame Gui was helped over, gray with smoke but not badly hurt. Still coughing, she forced out, "The crates, the copper tubes." Kan Han nodded. "My people recovered 2 before the fire spread. The rest were lost." A guard stepped forward and murmured several words into his ear. Kan Han's expression darkened. He turned to Van Chao. The 2 tubes contained copied troop movement lists and receipt slips. The silk mixed in with them was only camouflage. The paper was what they truly needed destroyed. Van Chao tightened her fingers in her sleeve. "Who?" "Not enough yet," he said, "but one road is clear now. The North Warehouse is under people tied to the Empress. The transfer papers passed beneath Marquis An Yuan's name. If we investigate directly now, whoever stands behind it will cut off every tail." Van Chao looked down and noticed a small burn on her wrist where a coal had struck her. It glowed red,
like a mark pressed there to remind her. Perhaps her mother had once been dragged into a place like this as well, seen part of a secret, and never made it back out. "I saw someone," she said once her breathing steadied. "A man with a hook-shaped scar on his right wrist. He was there the night my mother was taken." Kung Hin's gaze changed at once. "You are certain?" "I am." He was silent. "If that is true, then the claim that your mother was silenced is now almost beyond doubt." The words "silenced" fell into her chest like a slab of winter stone. She had prepared herself for years, yet hearing it plainly still made the space beneath her ribs tighten. Her anger had long been a mist without shape. Now it had a face. Kung Hin watched her for a long while. "You can withdraw now," he said. Van Chao lifted her head. "Does your Highness think I will?" "I think a clever person should know when her life matters more than an old grievance." She laughed once, thin and cold. "If my mother truly died because she touched these accounts, then, if I step back today, I would be admitting she died as she deserved." The wind shifted his sleeve. He said nothing for a time. Then he slid a simple white jade bracelet from his own wrist and placed it in her palm. The stone was warm from his skin. "Keep it. From now on, if anything urgent happens, bring it to the south gate of Prince Nin's residence. My people will know what it means." Van Chao meant to refuse, but he had already risen. "I do not enjoy watching subordinates die for nothing," he said, as if that were the plainest explanation in the world. That night she was settled in a side chamber within Prince Ning's residence, while a physician treated the burn and the smoke in her lungs. The room was modest but clean, with gray-silver curtains and a pot of white plum blossoms set on the writing table. Only after the physician left did she open her hand fully and look down at the jade bracelet. Was it a token of trust, or a thread drawing her further inward? Most likely it was both. By morning, news of the warehouse fire had reached the whole palace city. Officially, an overturned lamp had caused it. No one had died. Some goods had been lost. The matter was made to sound nothing more than an unfortunate accident. But Van Chao knew better. What had burned was not only a warehouse, it was the patience of the people on the other side. They had begun to want witnesses dead. 3 days later, Lady Huo urgently called her back to the Marquis's residence. The air in the main hall felt strange the moment she entered. Min Tu sat there pale-faced. On the table lay a charred copper tube, its wax edge melted away. Lady Huo kept her expression carefully smooth. "You are in the Bureau of Adornments now. Have you heard anything about the fire in the North Warehouse?" "Only that it was an accident." "An accident?" Min Tu suddenly laughed, the sound dry and brittle. "Little sister, that warehouse held materials linked to our part of the ceremonial works. If shortages are found, Marquis Anyuan's house will not come through clean." Van Chao looked at the tube. "Elder sister speaks as if she knows very well what the warehouse contained." Min Tu went still. Lady Huo snapped, "Enough. I did not call you back to argue. I only mean to remind you not to speak loosely about the North Warehouse outside. The Marquis's residence has responsibility in this matter. We rise or fall together. You are a daughter of the Ta family." Every time they wanted to shut her mouth, they brought out those same 4 words. Van Chao asked softly, "If I truly am of the Ta family, then when my mother died, why did not one person in this house show me a single paper, a single explanation?" Lady Huo slammed the table and shot to her feet. "The old matter will not be mentioned." "Because you do not dare mention it," Van Chao said, looking straight at her, "or because once it is mentioned, more names will follow. Mother, answer me one thing. Did Lady Liu once sign for tribute silk transferred into military supply or not?" The hall turned deathly quiet. For the briefest instant, panic crossed Lady Huo's eyes before she pressed it down. That instant was enough. "I understand," Van Chao said. Min Tu rose so quickly her chair scraped behind her. "Understand what?" she demanded, her voice as sharp as a blade. "That without the Ta family raising you, you would have frozen to death with your mother long ago. Do you think entering the Princess Royal's residence means someone can shield you forever? You are wrong. In this world, the winner is the one allowed to rewrite what is clean and what is dirty." Van Chao turned toward her. "Then that is why you are so desperate to win." "Yes," Min Tu said, lifting her chin, "I want to win. Do you know what I have always hated most about you? Even after being trampled into the dirt, you still lift your eyes as though you have never submitted to anyone." Van Chao took one step forward. "Then continue hating it, because I intend to lift my head even higher." She turned and left the hall. Behind her, a teacup shattered. Outside, late summer wind moved through the bamboo and carried the smell of coming rain. Liu Mama was waiting in the corridor, her face troubled. "Miss, Madam just sent people to search your late mother's old belongings. They're looking for something." Van Chow stopped. The ledger? Possibly. She returned to the west quarter at once. The old storage room had been tossed upside down. Wooden chests, fabric boxes, design sketches, everything had been searched. Fortunately, Van Chow had already moved the paper bearing Lady Liu's name and several important notes elsewhere. Still, while sorting through the wreckage, Liu Mama noticed a strange crack beneath the base of an old wooden platform bed that had once belonged to her mother. They pried it open with a narrow blade. A hidden compartment lay inside. Within it rested a cloth-bound black notebook browned with age. Van Chow's hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting inside was unmistakably her mother's, neat, gentle, and clear. It was not a diary, but a private record of design commissions received from noble households. Between ordinary pages, a few lines had been marked in a code her mother used for danger. On one page was written, "People from the Eastern Palace want to borrow the name of military ceremonial drapery to move tribute silk. I refused. Huo says I should sign and there will be no implication. I do not believe her." Beneath it was one unfinished line, the ink dragged off too suddenly. "If anything happens to me, tell Chow no more." That page split the past open in a single stroke. Her mother knew it. She knew she was being forced to sign. She had tried to leave words for her daughter, but had never had the chance to finish them. Liu Mama covered her mouth and sobbed. Van Chow stood very still for a long time, her eyes reddening without a single tear falling. When rain finally began to pound the roof, she closed the notebook and said in a voice so cold it startled even her, "The Eastern Palace, so that is it. The Prince Crown." Lady Huo and Min Tu were only the hands moving the strings inside the Marquis's residence. The one profiting enough to murder a concubine, erase a tea-house, and wrap military channels into the scheme could only be someone sitting much closer to the throne. The first rain of early summer roared over the tiles. Van Chow held the notebook tightly and heard her own heart beating like a drum before battle. From this moment on, she was no longer merely fighting an elder sister in the rear court. She was standing against the machine that ground people into ash in order to keep its own place unmoved. Chapter 5. Bright Moon Beyond the Clouds. After finding her mother's notebook, Van Chow did not return to Marquis Anyuan's residence for half a month. She asked Madame Gui to let her remain in the west wing of the Princess Royal's estate under the pretext that preparations for the end-of-year blessing ceremony had become urgent. Officially, she was busy. In truth, she understood too well that she now carried something that could cost people their lives. To carry it back and forth through the Marquis residence would have been little different from offering her throat. Kang Hing read the notebook in the private study of Prince Nin's residence and remained silent for a very long time. Lamplight crossed his face in alternating light and shadow, making him even harder to read. "Your mother wrote plainly that the people involved were from the Eastern Palace," he said at last. "But this notebook alone is not enough to pull the Crown Prince down." "I know," Van Chow answered, resting one hand against the edge of the desk so her voice would not shake. "To accuse an imperial prince, we need living proof, receipts, intermediaries, a present motive." "The motive exists," Kang Heng said, watching her. "At the year-end blessing rite, the Eastern Palace will submit a proposal to increase the budget for 3 northern garrisons. If this transfer route is still active, it is the best chance they will have to profit once more. Then we must catch them in the act. It will not be easy. The man with the hook-shaped scar was likely once attached to the Eastern Palace Guard and works only in the shadows now. If Lady Huo and Min Tu smell danger, they will cut every trace they can." Van Chow looked at the unfinished board beside him. White stones had been driven into the corner, apparently trapped, yet one diagonal move would let them strike back at the black center. They do not need to expose themselves out of fear. They must expose themselves out of greed. He lifted a brow. Van Chow nudged one white stone toward the center of the board. "Min Tu has wanted her whole life to climb into the Eastern Palace. After the North Warehouse fire, she will want even more desperately to make up for what was lost. If an opportunity appears now, one that makes her believe she can win protection from the Empress and the Crown Prince by seeing it through, she will throw her full strength behind it." "You want to hand her a false opportunity?" "No, a real one." Van Chow lifted her eyes. "The Princess Royal's side still lacks a cooperating hand for the blessing lantern drapery before the main hall. I can suggest the color-changing silk screens be overseen by Marquis Anyuan's household and argue that Min Tu has relevant experience. Once her name is accepted, she will think she has finally entered the site of palace power. Kang Hing studied her for a long time. You want to turn her into the point of the spear. It is dangerous. I don't mind. I do, he bluntly said. Those two words caught her off guard. Since the warehouse fire, something between them had shifted into a space difficult to name. Not merely strategist and piece, not master and subordinate, but this was the first time he had let that concern show so plainly. Van Chao lowered her gaze. If I do not stand nearby, she will never use her last move. Everything Min Tu does is measured against me. If I am present, she will grow impatient. Kan Hing closed his fingers around a game stone. I can arrange someone else, but no one else is me. The room went quiet enough for the sound of her own heartbeat to become audible. After a moment, he set the stone down. Very well, but from now on, every move you make will be reported to me. And this, he took back the jade bracelet he had once placed in her hand under the warehouse smoke, then fastened it properly around her wrist. This time, do not hide it in your sleeve. Keep it where my people can see it. She bowed her head slightly. Yes. The plan moved faster than expected. Steward Sun had doubts when Van Chao first suggested bringing Min Tu into the Blessing Lantern segment, but after Van Chao presented a new silk design and explained that the famous hand of Marquis Anyuan's legitimate daughter would please the Empress, Steward Sun finally agreed. The moment the news reached the Marquis's residence, Min Tu came to the Princess Royal's household to find Van Chao herself. This time she did not bother pretending sweetness. In the empty corridor beside the lake, Min Tu stared straight at her younger sister and laughed coldly. You recommended me yourself? I do not believe you are suddenly that kind-hearted. Van Chao answered evenly. I told you before, a useful tool gets used. If elder sister can do the work required by the Princess Royal's household, why should I not recommend you? You want to watch me rise high and then drag me down? I only want to see whether you can truly stand once you get there. Min Tu stepped closer, her beautiful eyes veiled in frost. Sometimes I really do regret it. If you had stayed obediently as a shadow, I would not have needed to push things this far. For the first time, Van Chao did not avoid the venom in her sister's face, then regret it too late. After that exchange, Min Tu indeed embraced the assignment with unusual fervor. She came and went from the Princess Royal's household constantly, met with the Empress's attendants, reviewed patterns, and selected silk with her own hands. Through the dispatch records, Van Chao and Madame Gui gradually tracked the new route. The tribute goods no longer passed through the north warehouse that had burned. Now they moved through a row of temporary structures built for workers repairing the ritual platform. On paper, those structures held carpentry tools. In reality, they had become a replacement transfer station. 3 days before the ceremony, a confidential message came in. The Ministry of Revenue would send inspectors to review a random selection of expenditure items connected to the blessing altar. The pretext was to prevent inflated costs. In practice, it meant the Eastern Palace faction only had 1 night left if they wanted to move new goods out and destroy what remained of the old evidence. That night, a crescent moon hung low. Under the cover of checking the Blessing Lantern draperies, Van Chao was permitted to move between the rear halls and the temporary structures. Kan Hing did not show himself, but she knew his people were nearby. The jade bracelet on her wrist felt like a silent point of balance. When the second watch sounded, she saw Min Tu appear by the rear passage in a gray cloak, accompanied by a middle-aged eunuch. They did not enter the main hall. Instead, they turned toward the temporary buildings. Van Chao followed in silence to a corner of the corridor. Through the half-shut door, she saw 3 people already inside. Lady Huo, the man with the hook-shaped scar, and a trusted palace eunuch from the Eastern Palace, whom she had previously glimpsed from afar in the Empress's company. Several new copper cylinders lay on the table beside transfer slips stamped in red, along with 6 rolls of white-silver silk. The moment Min Tu entered, she asked urgently, "Is everything ready? They inspect tomorrow morning." The eunuch replied, "Whether it is ready or not depends on whether eldest miss has enough courage to sign this last paper." He pushed forward a receipt slip. Min Tu picked up the brush, and Van Chao saw her hand tremble very slightly. "If I sign my name, and something happens later—" Lady Huo caught her daughter's hand. "Do not be afraid. Her Majesty promised that after the ceremony you would be brought near her service. Once that happens, who would dare touch you?" The scarred man gave a dry laugh. 1 stroke of the brush in exchange for half a lifetime of wealth. Van Chao's fingertips turned cold. This was exactly how they had pressed her mother. Set down a paper, promise there would be no implication, and bury the signer the moment the matter was finished. Just as Min Tu lowered the brush, Van Chao stepped out of the dark and pushed open the door. "Elder sister," she said, her voice cutting through the night like a narrow blade, "with this stroke, whose life are you planning to trade away?" Everyone in the room whirled. Mintu went white. Why are you here?" Van Chao did not answer. Her gaze moved across Lady Huo, the scarred man, the Eastern Palace eunuch, and finally settled on the receipt on the table. At the corner of the slip was the transfer mark changing ceremonial supplies into moisture-proof military materials. The same trick again. Lady Huo recovered first. "Bursting in at this hour, what are you trying to do?" "The thing you once forbid anyone from speaking of," Van Chao said. She stepped forward and placed her mother's black notebook on the table. "I came to speak of the old debt." Lady Huo's face changed at once. Mintu stared at the notebook, lips trembling. "Where did you get that?" "From under my mother's bed platform, the place you must not have searched carefully enough back then." The scarred man's hand moved toward his waist. At that exact moment, the rear door burst open. Imperial guards flooded in, followed by Kan Heng in plain black, his face colder than anything in the room. Steward Sun came behind him, along with Madame Gui and an inspecting official from the Imperial Household Department. The Eastern Palace eunuch had only begun to shout before he was forced to his knees. Lady Huo stumbled back half a step. Mintu let the brush fall, and ink spilled across the receipt like blood. Kan Heng went straight to the table, lifted the paper, and scanned it once. "Excellent. The people, the goods, the marks, the intended signature. Everything is here." With a roar, the scarred man pulled a knife and lunged toward Van Chao. He never reached her. A guard intercepted him, wrenched him down, and in the struggle, his right wrist showed clearly beneath the sleeve, the hook-shaped scar. Van Chao stared at it and felt cold run across her spine. After all these years, she was finally looking at the face of the man who stood outside her courtyard on the night her mother was taken. "It was him," she said, each word hoarse but steady.
He tried to deny it. King Hein merely gave a slight gesture. A guard immediately drew an old military token from the man's sleeve. The inspector from the Imperial Household Department took one look and blanched. "This is an old badge from the Eastern Palace Guard unit." Mintu collapsed to her knees. "It wasn't me. I only did what I was told." "By whom?" Van Chao asked, not blinking. "By Mother? By the Empress? Or by your own hunger to climb upward?" Mintu burst into tears, but no one in the room pitied her now. "I only wanted a better life. From the time I was small, I was taught that if a woman wanted to stand firm, she had to marry into the highest place, gain power, win. If I did not do it, someone else would. Your mother was in the way, so—" She choked there, but half a sentence was enough. In the space of a few breaths, Lady Huo seemed to age years. Still, she forced her voice steady. "Your Highness, this is merely foolishness within a household. It has nothing to do with the Eastern Palace. A reckless eunuch, a daring old servant. It cannot—" Kang Han cut her off. "Rest assured, madam, whether it involves more people or not, there is no need for you to explain it tonight. Tomorrow, before His Majesty and the Empress Dowager, others will ask." All blood drained from Lady Huo's face. The great ceremony the next morning still proceeded, but not as the Eastern Palace had intended. Before the blessing lantern could be raised, the Imperial Household Department publicly announced an inspection of the temporary structures after discovering irregular material transfers. The angled hand, empty receipt, copper cylinders not yet moved, Lady Lu's notebook, the old palace guard token, the first confession of the scarred man, and the testimony of the old head maid arrested at Marquis Anyun's household. Each item was laid out, like stones placed to finish a game. The Empress Dowager was furious on the spot. The Empress tried to keep control, but the moment the issue of military supply records being hidden beneath ritual names was spoken aloud, the air upon the raised platform changed visibly. The Crown Prince was not condemned that very day, but he was ordered to remain within the Eastern Palace under investigation. Lady Huo and Mintu were escorted away before the eyes of all. Marquis Anyun's household, which had stood proudly in the capital that morning, became a name people no longer wanted to say aloud. In the middle of that collapsing scene, Van Chao stood beneath the white stone steps and looked up at the winter sky opening pale beyond the cloud cover. She had thought she would feel triumph, but when everything truly fell, the first feeling inside her was emptiness. Kang Han came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" "That if my mother were still alive, she probably would not want me to look at this alone." He was silent a moment, then said, "The dead cannot return, but the justice owed to them can still be returned by the living." The wind moved the white ribbons hanging from the blessing lantern. Van Chao remembered the unfinished line in the notebook. "If anything happens to me, tell Chao."
Her mother had never finished the sentence, yet suddenly Van Chao understood that perhaps the rest had never needed words. Perhaps it was only this: live, see clearly, and do not let them turn you mute as they tried to turn me. Your Highness, she said softly, for today, thank you. He looked at her sidelong. Only thank you?
She raised her eyes and met his. For the first time since she had known him, there was less distance in them, fewer layers of cool reserve. Only a quiet firmness remained, as if through every turn he had never stood very far from her at all. "What does your Highness want, then?" she asked. He did not circle around it. "I want you to remain where I can still see you." The pale sun of late winter broke from the clouds and touched the steps, their sleeves, and the jade bracelet on her wrist. Van Chao laughed very softly. After so many years, it might have been the first time her smile was not used to swallow pain or hide a blade. "That sounds less like keeping a subordinate," she said, "and more like keeping the person herself." "Yes," Can Hang answered without hesitation, "I am keeping the person." Heat touched her ears, but for once she did not turn away. It took more than a month for the case to reach its final conclusion. Lady Huo was stripped of authority over the household and sent to a country estate under watch. Min Tu's marriage negotiations were all cancelled, and she was forced into religious seclusion at a convent outside the city. Marcus Ta was demoted a rank for negligence in allowing the inner household to become entangled in the case. The Crown Prince lost much of his control over financial oversight, and his faction weakened visibly, though his title did not change. As for Lady Liu, the Imperial Household Department finally revised the record. She had been forced to sign and died unjustly when they silenced her. Her memorial tablet was permitted into the ancestral hall beside the consorts whose status had been formally recognized. For others, it was only a small late justice. For Van Chao, it was something she had waited for nearly half her life. On the day her mother's tablet was carried into the ancestral hall, the sky was strangely clear. Liu Mama cried so hard she could barely stand. Van Chao lit the incense with her own hands and bowed deeply before the thin, drifting smoke. "I did it," she whispered. When she stepped out again, Can Hang was waiting beneath a plum tree in the courtyard. He was not wearing princely robes, only a dark blue robe plain enough to make him look almost ordinary. "Where do you plan to live from now on?" he asked. "In a place where no one will ever again use my birth to teach me I must bow my head." "Then come to Prince Ning's residence." He met her eyes. "No bowing required." Van Chao was silent for a little while. The first breeze of spring moved through the branches, shaking the last white plum buds. For years she had only thought of revenge. She had imagined that when it was over, only a cold emptiness would remain. Yet it turned out that beyond the ashes there was still another road. "Your Highness," she said, "I do not want to become anyone's shadow ever again." Can Hang nodded. "I do not need a shadow. I need someone clear-eyed enough to stand beside me." That answer settled her heart more than any beautiful promise could have. She stepped down from the stone ledge and came to stand level with him. Then all right. He lifted his hand as if to touch her, paused for half a breath to be sure she would not avoid him, and then only caught lightly at the edge of her sleeve. It was an extraordinarily gentle gesture, yet it carried more solemnity than all the lavish betrothal gifts in the world. Behind them, incense smoke from the ancestral hall rose in a straight line into the pale blue sky. Before them, spring sunlight spilled across the brick path in a long golden strip. In that moment, Van Chao understood that what she had reclaimed was not only justice for the dead, it was also the right to choose her own path in life. From that day onward, whether she walked deeper into the palace city or farther beyond the capital, she would never again be the girl standing in a side courtyard and watching other people's lanterns burn from a distance. She had become a light no one would ever put out easily.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.